ordinary Tuesday afternoon. Eleanor Hayes, CEO of a $3.2 billion company, brought her 7-year-old son to the park. In just a few seconds, her world shattered. A stranger appeared at the fountain's edge, and he looked exactly like her son. Not a passing resemblance, a perfect copy, down to the rarest detail. 2 eyes of different colors, one brown, one blue, gray. Eleanor stepped forward and said coldly, "Why does my son look exactly like you?" The man looked straight at her. Then he asked, "Does your son have a crescent-shaped birthmark on his left shoulder? If you found out your child might not be your child, would you choose the truth or keep living in the lie?" Eleanor Hayes had built her life the way she built everything else, on precision. Nothing happened without planning. Not the quarterly projections. Not the restructuring of her real estate portfolio. And certainly not the arrival of her son. She had been 31 when the oncologist used the word malignant. Stage 2, left breast, with a secondary concern that aggressive treatment would almost certainly eliminate future natural conception. Eleanor had listened without crying, asked 3 follow-up questions, scheduled surgery for Monday, and called her attorney on the way home. In remission 2 years later, she had already identified a fertility clinic, signed a surrogacy contract, and begun the process that would, 14 months afterward, bring Ethan Daniel Hayes into the world, or so she had been told. Her husband Daniel had managed the medical arrangements. At the time, that had made sense. Daniel expressed love through management, orchestrating details, anticipating needs, ensuring every moving part ran without friction. Eleanor, consumed by the company's expansion, had been grateful. She had signed the documents he placed before her. She had attended the appointments he scheduled. She had trusted him completely. Ethan was born in October. 7 pounds, 4 ounces. He had Daniel's surname, Eleanor's stubbornness, and a pair of mismatched eyes the pediatrician called heterochromia iridium. Harmless, beautiful, and very rare. Eleanor had wept when she first held him. Only the second time she had cried since the diagnosis. By the time Ethan was 7, Eleanor had been a widow for 2 years. A sudden cardiac event. Daniel was gone before any ambulance arrived. And Eleanor grieved the only way she knew, by working harder, loving her son more fiercely, and never once considering there might be something she didn't know. Ethan was brilliant and gentle, and prone to questions that made adults uncomfortable. He loved sailing model boats, collected pine cones, and handled everything with a seriousness that made people smile. He was the only thing in Eleanor's life she could not optimize. He was her one soft place. She would have dismantled every structure she had ever built to protect him. Lucas Bennett knew nothing of Eleanor Hayes the morning he brought his daughter Mia to Riverside Park. He was a high school history teacher with 14 years of experience, a modest apartment on Clover Street, and the particular quiet dignity of people who have survived something enormous and kept going. He drove a 9-year-old sedan. He made his own lunches. He coached the junior debate team without additional pay because someone had once done the same for him. Mia was 9 years old, with her father's composure and her mother's dark eyes. She was the kind of child who noticed things: a bird's broken wing, a classmate sitting alone, the way her father's voice changed when someone asked about her mother. She never pushed on those moments. She simply held his hand. Lucas had been alone with Mia since the night his wife Rebecca died in childbirth. The twins had been conceived naturally, both heartbeats healthy through the difficult pregnancy. But in the early hours of that November morning, a nurse came out to take him to a room where Rebecca was already gone. Catastrophic hemorrhage. A decision made in minutes. Then silence. Mia was brought to him wrapped in yellow, screaming with the fury of someone who had arrived and intended to stay. The second child, a boy, had not survived, they said. 18 minutes of attempts. Nothing. A grief counselor had spoken to Lucas before he left. A social worker had visited twice after. There had been a certificate. There had been a casket. He had never questioned any of it. Because why would he? He had just lost his wife. He had a newborn to keep alive. He had no bandwidth for suspicion, and no reason, none at all on the surface, to suspect that the worst most ordinary kind of tragedy was anything other than what it appeared. The sailboat was a birthday gift, white-hulled, red-sailed, named Compass in small, careful letters along the hull. Ethan brought it to the park every Sunday. He was good at finding the current, but poor at retrieval. And on this particular afternoon, the hull had lodged in a corner of the fountain's stone rim that required longer arms than a 7-year-old possessed. Lucas noticed the boy before Mia pointed, standing at the pond's edge, leaning over at an angle that promised a wet outcome. Lucas walked over, rolled up his sleeve, and reached in. The boat came free with a soft scrape. He handed it back, and the boy took it with both hands and immediately checked the sail for damage. "Compass," the boy said, showing Lucas the name painted along the hull. "Good name," Lucas said. "Do you know how to use a real one?" The boy looked up. "I know that north is always north, even when everything else changes." "That's exactly right." Lucas turned to go, and that was when he saw the woman crossing the grass. Dark coat, dark hair, an expression that could mean either nothing or everything. She was looking at him and at the boy in rapid alternation, the way eyes move when performing a calculation they cannot complete. He turned back toward the boy, and the afternoon light caught both their faces at the same angle. Lucas went very still. The jaw, the cheekbones, the nose with its subtle upward tilt, and the eyes, one brown, one gray-blue. The single feature he had never been able to stop thinking about, because Rebecca had mentioned it in the final weeks of the pregnancy. Laughing and nervous and beautiful. What if one of them gets those eyes? My grandmother had them. It skips generations. He had forgotten that until this exact moment. The woman stopped 2 feet away and said with perfect calm, "Why does my son look exactly like you?" And Lucas looked at her, and looked at the boy, and felt every organized structure of the past 9 years begin to shudder at its foundation. Eleanor did not panic. She ran scenarios. He was approximately 38. No visible markers of wealth. The child beside him watching everything with the practiced stillness of someone accustomed to reading rooms. And the man himself, whatever she had expected him to say, had not said it. He was just looking at Ethan, with an expression she couldn't name. That was what disturbed her most. She knew every expression that greed wore. This man did not look like he wanted anything. He looked afraid. "I don't think we've met," he said finally. "No. I'd like to know who you are and why you're here." "I'm here because my daughter wanted to fly her kite." "My name is Lucas Bennett. I'm a history teacher." Eleanor noted the name and moved forward. "The resemblance between you and my son is not coincidental. If you were involved in the surrogacy process that produced my son as a donor, an intermediary, or in any other capacity, I need to know that now." A flicker crossed his face. "I genuinely don't know what you're talking about. The resemblance, I see it," he said. His voice had changed quieter now, and weighted with something she couldn't categorize. "Very clearly. But I promise you I've never been involved in any surrogacy process. No clinic, no donation, nothing. And no one sent me here." She studied him for 3 full seconds. He did not look away. He showed none of the micro-expressions of deception she had trained herself to recognize over 2 decades of negotiation. She pulled out her phone, walked 6 steps, and called her head of security. Run his name. Lucas Bennett, history teacher. 20 minutes. When she turned back, Lucas had crouched to Ethan's level, maintaining careful distance, just listening while Ethan explained the rigging. The patient attention of it infuriated her, for reasons she couldn't immediately identify. "Step away from my son." Lucas stood without argument, but as he rose, his eyes moved to Ethan's collar to where it met the base of his neck. He couldn't see through the fabric. He looked back at Eleanor with something rawer than anything he'd shown before. "The birthmark," he said quietly. "Does he have it?" "That information is private." "I know it is, but I need to ask you something carefully, because I think we're both standing on the edge of something neither of us is ready for." He held her gaze. "How certain are you, truly certain, about the circumstances of your son's birth?" Eleanor said nothing for a long moment, but there was something in how he asked, weighted with a specific dread she recognized. The kind worn in hospital corridors, waiting for words you already know, that kept her from dismissing him outright. "Explain yourself," she said. Lucas glanced toward Mia on the bench, kite folded in her lap, then back. 9 years ago, my wife died in labor. We were expecting twins. Only one survived, that's what they told me. The other, a boy, died within the first hour. They said it would be better if I didn't see him. The casket was sealed. He delivered it in the flat, careful way of someone who has rehearsed a story, not because it was a lie, but because repetition required anesthesia. I buried my son in Lakeview Cemetery on a Saturday morning in November, and I've spent 9 years believing that. Eleanor's eyes moved to Ethan at the fountain's edge. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because your son has heterochromia. My wife had the condition in her family line. Her grandmother carried it. She mentioned it in the last weeks of pregnancy. Said it was the one genetic thing she hoped for." He swallowed. "When I looked at your son just now, I wasn't looking for a resemblance. I wasn't looking for anything, and I still saw it. The jaw, the nose, the coloring. But it's the eyes. The eyes I can't explain away." Eleanor was quiet for 11 seconds. She counted. "The birthmark," she said finally. "My wife had one. A crescent shape, below the left shoulder blade. Small, like it was drawn there on purpose. I don't know if it passes genetically, but I know what I'm looking at, and I'm not here to threaten you or take anything from you. I just need to know if it's there." Eleanor turned and looked at her son. Ethan had the birthmark. She had noticed it at his first bath, a thin crescent of deeper pigment close to his spine, only visible when his arms were raised. The clinic midwife had called it meaningless. Eleanor had thought it beautiful. She had never told anyone about it. It appeared in no document she had ever shared. This man could not have known, unless he had a reason that had nothing to do with documents. "His name is Ethan," Eleanor said. Her voice was the calmest it had ever been in her life, which meant it was also the most dangerous. "Ethan has the birthmark." Lucas closed his eyes, and for the first time since the conversation began, he looked like a man who was not holding himself together by will alone. He told her the rest of it at the park's edge, while Ethan sailed, and Mia watched clouds move overhead. Rebecca Martinez Bennett had been 28 years old when she became pregnant. The twins had been conceived naturally, both heartbeats healthy, through a difficult but progressing pregnancy. The delivery began 4 weeks early, not uncommon for twins, the doctors had said. Lucas had waited outside for 2 hours before a nurse led him to a room where Rebecca was already gone. Hemorrhage. A decision made in minutes. Then silence. Mia had been brought to him wrapped in yellow, screaming with the fury of someone who had arrived and intended to stay. The second child, the boy, had been born without a heartbeat. 18 minutes of attempts. Nothing. A grief counselor spoke to Lucas before he left. A social worker visited twice in the weeks after. There had been a certificate. There had been a casket. He had never questioned any of it. Because why would he? He had just lost his wife. He had a newborn to keep alive. And no reason, none at all on the surface, to suspect that ordinary tragedy was anything other than what it appeared to be. The doctor who delivered them, Eleanor said. His name, Morrison. Philip Morrison. He had privileges at St. Catherine's Medical Center. He retired not long after. I never saw him again. The name moved through Eleanor, with the weight of something half known. She stored it. "I've thought about my son every year," Lucas said, November 8th. "I take Mia to the cemetery, and we put a small boat there. She chose that when she was old enough to understand. She said her brother would have liked boats." He exhaled slowly. "She's never asked me why I cry. She just holds my hand." Across the park, Ethan crouched to lift the sailboat from the water with both hands, careful and deliberate. Lucas watched him. Eleanor watched. Lucas, watch him. "I'm not asking you to believe me," Lucas said. "I understand if your first instinct is to remove me from this situation. But if any part of this, even a small part, is telling you to pay attention, please don't dismiss it. Because I spent 9 years not paying attention to what was right in front of me, and I don't think I can afford that again." Eleanor was quiet. Then, "Give me your number, and stay away from my son until I've verified what you've told me. Not an accusation, just the right order of things. He wrote his number on a receipt from his jacket pocket and handed it over. Then he called Mia from her bench, and they walked toward the park gate. He didn't look back, but at the gate he stopped for one moment, just one, and closed his eyes. November 8th. The date he had buried someone, or thought he had. Eleanor did not sleep that night. She sat at her desk until 3 a.m, laptop open, legal pad filled on both sides, organized by the particular clarity of purpose she had not felt since the days immediately following Daniel's death. Then, she had turned grief into tasks. Now, she turned suspicion into evidence. By 6 a.m, she had contacted Warren Cole, her attorney, with 2 directives: a background check on Lucas Bennett, and whatever was obtainable about the medical records surrounding Ethan's birth. The surrogacy had been arranged through Meridian Reproductive Associates, a private clinic Daniel had selected, liaised with, and managed entirely. She had been grateful for his involvement at the time. She was less grateful now. She pulled the private trust Daniel had maintained separately, the one she had accessed once after his death, and filed under matters to revisit. She requested a full transaction history going back 12 years. The report came back before noon. A wire transfer, $4.5 million, in 2 installments, the first in the October of the year before Ethan's birth. The second the following March to an account she didn't recognize. She ran the number through Warren. He called back in 40 minutes. The account belonged to a private medical holding company, dissolved 8 years ago. The registered director was a physician named Philip Morrison. A pause. He also held consulting privileges at St. Catherine's Medical Center. Obstetrics. Retired 11 years ago. Find him, Eleanor said. She spent the afternoon going through Daniel's personal files transferred to a storage drive after his death and never fully reviewed, because reviewing them had felt like an excavation of grief she wasn't ready for. Contracts, correspondence, financial records, and, buried near the back of a subfolder labeled Admin Misc, 3 emails between Daniel and an address she didn't recognize, dated 9 years prior, in the weeks surrounding Ethan's birth. The emails were not explicit, the kind of communication between people who do not want to be explicit, but 2 phrases stopped her cold. The first, transfer is complete. Documentation has been arranged. Daniel's reply, make sure the other record stays buried. Permanently. Other record. She sat with those 2 words for a long time. She thought about every time Daniel had redirected her when she asked too many questions about the surrogacy process. How he had always had an answer ready. A folder, a document, a response that satisfied the surface of her concern without requiring her to look underneath. Protecting her, he had called it. Shielding her from administrative complexity while she recovered. She had accepted that. All of it. Warren called again at 7 in the evening. Philip Morrison was 71, living 4 hours north of the city, near a lake. He had not practiced medicine in over a decade. Eleanor looked at the number for a long moment. Then she dialed. The man answered on the 4th ring. When she said her name, the line went quiet for several seconds before he spoke. I wondered, he said, if this call would ever come. She drove north that Friday. Lucas sat in the passenger seat not because she trusted him fully yet, but because his story had checked out in every verifiable particular. Rebecca's death certificate, the burial record at Lakeview, his employment history, his daughter's birth certificate, all clean, consistent, and deeply real. She had asked him to come because she had decided, somewhere between Wednesday and Thursday, that if what she suspected was true, Lucas was the only other person on Earth with the same stake in this moment. She did not want to do this alone. They drove mostly in silence. Ethan was home with Victoria, Eleanor's housekeeper of 4 years. Eleanor had told him she had a work meeting. He had looked at her in that particular way of his seeing around the edges and said simply, "Okay, Mom," and gone back to his book. She thought about Daniel, the entire drive north. She had loved him. She believed that even now. But she was beginning to understand that love and knowledge were not the same thing. That you could spend years inside a marriage and still be standing in rooms full of doors you had never been invited to open. Daniel had been brilliant and capable and genuinely warm in the ways she needed warmth. And he had also, she now believed, committed an act so monstrous that she could not hold it whole without her mind flinching away. "Did your wife ever mention Meridian Reproductive Associates?" she asked, somewhere around the second hour. "Never," Lucas said. "Did Daniel's name come up in any context you remember?" "Not once." Eleanor turned the heat down. "The car was too warm. I think my husband found your wife through the clinic. I think Morrison already paid $4.5 million needed to deliver a child when the original surrogate miscarried. So he identified your wife as a match, arranged everything, and planned from the beginning to take one of the twins." Lucas was quiet. "You mean the swap was premeditated? From the start?" She paused. "I think your son didn't die. I think he was taken from you at birth, and I think Daniel bought him." The word "bought" sat in the car like something with physical weight. Lucas turned to look out the window. His jaw was working. "Rebecca never knew," he said. "Not a question." "No," Eleanor said. "I don't believe she did." They didn't speak again for the rest of the drive. But somewhere around the third hour, without discussion, Lucas reached over and turned the heat back up. Eleanor did not comment, but she was grateful. Philip Morrison came to the door before they knocked, which told Eleanor he had been watching from the window. He was older than she had pictured, thin with the look of a man who had lost something and was tired of carrying the knowledge of it. His eyes moved between Eleanor and Lucas, with the dread of someone being asked, at last, to set down weight he'd carried too long. "Come in," he said. He made tea. He sat across from them at a kitchen table and folded his hands and looked at his folded hands. "Dr. Morrison," Eleanor said, "I have wire transfer records, emails, and a timeline. I have a man sitting next to me who buried his son 9 years ago in a sealed casket. I have a son at home with heterochromia, a crescent-shaped birthmark, and a face that belongs to both of them. Tell me I'm wrong." Morrison did not tell her she was wrong. What followed took 40 minutes, and it was the most devastating 40 minutes of Eleanor's adult life. The surrogate originally contracted by Daniel Hayes had suffered a miscarriage in the 9th week, concealed from Eleanor, who had been told the pregnancy was progressing normally. Daniel had gone directly to Morrison. Morrison, who was not only the clinic's director but a man with a history of operating in the spaces between legality and expedience, had identified Rebecca Bennett as a patient of St. Catherine's Young, healthy, carrying twins, anonymous in the way that a woman without wealth or connections tends to be anonymous in medical systems. The plan was brutal in its simplicity. If both twins survived, one would be placed. The parents would be told there was only one survivor. Documentation would be fabricated through a falsified adoption channel Morrison had used twice before. "What happened to the surrogate?" Eleanor asked, because she needed the full picture. "Settlement, non-disclosure. She moved out of state." "The documentation," Lucas said. His voice had been almost perfectly level throughout, and Eleanor understood. This was not calm. It was something past calm, something more dangerous. "Where is it?" "Destroyed 7 years ago, after Daniel died." "I thought it was over." "It was never over," Lucas said. And then his voice broke, just once, at the edge of the last word, and he pressed his hand flat on the table and breathed. "I buried my son. I put a boat in the ground because my daughter said her brother would have liked boats. And you sat in this house for 7 years. Morrison had the decency not to justify himself. Eleanor waited until Lucas steadied. Then, "You will provide a full written statement, signed, every page, delivered to my attorney. You will make yourself available for whatever legal process follows. If you don't, the evidence I've assembled independently goes to the district attorney Monday morning." She stood. "You took something from both of us. This is the minimum you can do." Outside, the light had gone flat and gray. Lucas sat on the front steps with his face in his hands. Eleanor stood beside him, not touching, not offering words, because there were none. She was also, quietly, falling apart in her own interior way, without sound, without visible evidence, just the slow collapse of every assumption that had organized her understanding of her own life. Her husband had bought her son. She had loved them both. She sat down on the steps beside Lucas, and they stayed there in silence. While inside the house, an old man wrote the confession that would change all of their lives. The DNA results arrived on a Thursday, 12 days after Morrison's house. Warren called at 8:53 in the morning. Probability of paternity Lucas Bennett being Ethan's biological father 99.97%. "Thank you, Warren," Eleanor said.